Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The silent force of shame. There exists a force that most people never see but nearly everyone feels. It does not strike with fists, nor does it shout loudly from outside. Instead, it works quietly, in the hidden corridors of the mind. This force eats away at confidence, bends self-perception, and dictates, without mercy, the boundaries of what a person believes they are allowed to feel, express, or pursue. It is not a weapon you can touch, yet it cuts more deeply than steel. This force is called shame. Unlike physical pain, shame seeps into the psyche with subtlety. It disguises itself as reason, as caution, as humility. But beneath its mask, it is corrosive. Few emotions are so misunderstood, yet so deeply entrenched in the human condition, as shame. Guilt, for example, is often confused with it, but guilt and shame do not play the same role. Guilt says, "I did something wrong." That statement points to a behavior, an action that can be corrected, learned from, or repaired. Shame, however, delivers a far heavier sentence, "I am something wrong." It does not accuse what you did, it condemns who you are. This is what makes shame so destructive. It infiltrates identity. It convinces a person that flaws are not mistakes to be fixed but truths about their very existence. When shame takes hold, it does not just hurt feelings for a moment, it establishes an invisible system of control. It says, "You are unworthy. You must hide. You do not deserve love, respect, or belonging." And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the individual begins to obey. From the earliest years of life, shame sneaks in through small openings. A disapproving look from a parent. A cruel comparison between siblings. A mocking laugh from classmates. A careless criticism about how a child looks, speaks, or behaves. None of these seem catastrophic in isolation. Yet the child, still too young to question or defend against these judgments, absorbs them as truth. The thought does not remain, "I was scolded for what I did." It mutates into something far more dangerous, "There is something wrong with me." Once this seed is planted, the process of fragmentation begins. To be accepted, the child learns to hide parts of themselves. To be loved, they learn to adjust, to mold, to comply. Authenticity, the natural impulse to laugh freely, to cry loudly, to question endlessly, is placed upon the altar of approval and sacrificed. What remains is a mask, a false identity crafted not out of truth but out of fear. And beneath that mask, the authentic self retreats further into silence. The years pass, but the voice of shame does not fade. It becomes internalized. A constant whispering judge lurks within, scrutinizing every action, every thought, every desire. It questions natural impulses. It suffocates spontaneity. It brands vulnerability as weakness. And so, many adults walk through life carrying this silent overseer inside them, believing every word it says. They censor their desires before speaking them. They diminish their dreams before pursuing them. They suppress emotions before allowing themselves to feel them. Why? Because shame has convinced them that exposure equals rejection, and that honesty equals unworthiness. In this way, shame functions as one of the most efficient systems of control ever created. Unlike external punishment, which ends when the authority figure disappears, shame does not need supervision. The authority has been installed inside the individual. The prison has no bars, but the prisoner never escapes, because the guard lives within the self. And here lies the greatest tragedy. Over time, people stop realizing they are ashamed. They begin to believe that they truly are defective, inadequate, or unworthy. The voice of shame no longer feels like an intruder, it feels like the self. And when that confusion solidifies, the cycle of silence and secrecy becomes nearly unbreakable. But shame is not truth. It is not destiny. It is a learned system, passed down through disapproving looks, critical words, and cultural pressures. And because it was learned, it can be unlearned. The first step is seeing it clearly. To name it, to recognize its presence, and to separate identity from the false judgments it has imposed. That is the purpose of this journey, to reveal shame's hidden gears, to dismantle its power, and to reclaim the freedom to live authentically. The origins of shame. Shame does not arrive with us at birth. No infant comes into the world believing they are flawed. A baby's natural state is authenticity, crying when hungry, laughing at simple delight, reaching with curiosity, expressing emotions without hesitation. The earliest form of life is pure openness, unfiltered by fear of judgment. Yet somewhere along the way, that innocence becomes fractured. Shame is not innate, it is constructed, conditioned, and transmitted. The earliest seeds of shame are planted not through dramatic traumas alone but often through subtle, seemingly ordinary interactions. A disapproving look when a child cries too loudly. A dismissive comment when they ask too many questions. A comparison with a sibling who appears more talented or obedient. A harsh punishment for a simple act of exploration. In the child's mind, these small signals carry enormous weight. The message received is not, what you did was wrong. It becomes, who you are is wrong. This is how the process of internalization begins. The child, unable to analyze or resist, absorbs these moments as truths about their identity. They learn quickly that being fully themselves, emotional, curious, vulnerable, leads to disapproval or rejection. Out of necessity, they begin to adapt. To belong, they repress. To be accepted, they hide. To be loved, they reshape. Thus begins the painful sacrifice of authenticity in exchange for approval. What develops from this is what many psychologists call the false self. This false self is not the spontaneous, living core of the child. It is a mask, carefully crafted to fit the expectations of parents, teachers, peers, and society at large. It is an armor designed for survival, a role performed to guarantee belonging. But this mask comes at a great cost. Beneath it, the true self is locked away, silenced, and increasingly forgotten. Over time, this adaptation becomes automatic. The child grows into an adolescent, then an adult, carrying with them the habits of concealment. They no longer stop to think, am I hiding right now, because hiding has become their default. They begin censoring thoughts before speaking, suppressing emotions before feeling, abandoning dreams before daring to pursue them. In many cases, they even forget that they once lived without this mask at all. The tragedy deepens when this dynamic repeats itself across generations. Adults who were shamed in childhood often unconsciously pass the same patterns onto their own children. The parent who was once told, "Don't cry, it's weak," now silences their child's tears. The teacher who was belittled for mistakes now ridicules students for errors. Shame, once internalized, becomes contagious. It spreads quietly, disguised as discipline, guidance, or cultural norms. And yet, it is important to understand that shame is not always the result of malicious intent. Often, it arises from ignorance. Parents or authority figures may not realize that their disapproving glance or sarcastic remark leaves a scar. Society itself, in its relentless drive for conformity, sends constant signals about what is acceptable and what is not. In this way, shame becomes woven into the fabric of daily life, reinforced not just by individuals but by entire communities and institutions. But whether subtle or severe, the message lands the same: if I am fully myself, I will not be loved. This belief is deeply traumatic, even when it arrives without shouting or explicit cruelty. Because for a child, belonging is survival. To risk rejection feels like to risk life itself. And so the child chooses adaptation over authenticity, silence over expression, compliance over individuality. The result is a psychic division, a split between the true self and the false self. The true self holds all the raw emotions, desires, and impulses that once flowed freely. The false self, polished and edited, is presented to the world in hopes of gaining acceptance. And as this division deepens, an internal void grows. The individual feels increasingly alienated from themselves, increasingly hungry for validation, increasingly convinced that something essential is missing. This void is the wound of shame. And unless it is addressed, it becomes the foundation of a life built on fear and pretense. The adults shaped by this dynamic may succeed outwardly, may even appear confident, but inside they remain haunted by a quiet, relentless suspicion: there is something wrong with me. This is the hidden origin of shame. Not a single catastrophic moment, but countless small fractures that together form an identity bound by secrecy and fear. And yet, by understanding where it begins, we also begin to see how it can end. For if shame is learned, it can be unlearned. If it was constructed, it can be dismantled. The path forward requires courage, to look back, to name the wound, and to reclaim the authenticity once silenced. The inner judge. Once shame has been absorbed in childhood, it does not simply disappear with age. Instead, it evolves into something more insidious: an inner judge. This judge is not an external parent, teacher, or critic anymore. It becomes internalized, taking up residence in the mind, whispering commands and condemnations as though it were one's own voice. And because it disguises itself as conscience or reason, its power grows stronger over time. This inner judge operates with subtle precision. It tells you not to speak too loudly, not to show too much emotion, not to risk expressing a vulnerable truth. It warns: don't embarrass yourself. Don't let them see that side of you. No one will take you seriously. At first glance, these thoughts may sound protective. They appear to shield you from rejection or ridicule. But their real purpose is not guidance, it is control. The voice does not build confidence, it undermines it. It does not encourage growth, it shrinks possibility. It does not nurture, it humiliates. This internal voice is one of the most effective systems of psychological surveillance. It acts like a prison guard, watching your every move. The walls of this prison are invisible, but the sense of confinement is very real. You may long to speak up in a meeting, but the judge whispers, "Stay quiet, you'll sound foolish." You may wish to take a creative risk, but the judge insists, "You're not good enough, don't even try." You may desire to open up in love, but the judge sneers, "If you show yourself, they will leave." The result is paralysis, an ongoing suppression of the authentic self. What makes this prison so powerful is that it feels self-generated. Unlike external criticism, which can be ignored or resisted, the inner judge convinces you that its voice is your own. It becomes indistinguishable from thought itself. And so, many people live entire lives without realizing that they are not following their conscience, they are following conditioning. They are not guided by wisdom, they are driven by fear disguised as reason. The consequences of this inner surveillance are profound. Creativity is stifled, because creativity requires freedom. Relationships suffer, because intimacy requires vulnerability. Joy is muted, because joy requires spontaneity. A person living under the rule of shame becomes a diminished version of themselves, a carefully managed, acceptable, domesticated self that will not risk rejection but will also never taste full freedom. Michel Foucault, in his writings on power and control, described how external systems of surveillance become most effective when they are internalized. A guard standing outside your cell is one thing. But if the guard lives inside your head, there is no need for chains, the prisoner will police themselves. Shame operates exactly in this way. It does not need constant reminders from parents, teachers, or peers once it has been internalized. The individual carries the judge within, enforcing the rules without anyone else having to say a word. And so, the life of the shamed individual is ruled by fear, fear of being seen, fear of being judged, fear of not being enough. They may appear confident on the surface, but beneath lies a constant background hum of anxiety, self-censorship, and unrelenting vigilance. Every decision is filtered, every gesture measured, every word rehearsed. But here is the truth, that judge is not you. It may sound like you, but it is not your authentic self. It is the echo of every disapproving gaze, every cruel comparison, every critical word you absorbed as truth. It is a construction, not an identity. And once you begin to see it clearly, to name it for what it is, cracks appear in the prison walls. Awareness becomes the first act of liberation. In the chapters to come, we will explore how to recognize these patterns more clearly, how to separate self from shame, and how to reclaim the freedom that this inner judge has stolen. For the first step in breaking free is always the same, realizing that the voice controlling you was never yours to begin with. Recognizing the patterns. Shame does not always introduce itself openly. It rarely announces, "Here I am, and I control you." Instead, it hides behind everyday thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. It wears disguises so natural that most people mistake them for personality traits or harmless habits. To break its grip, the first essential step is recognition, learning to see shame not as truth, but as a pattern. One of the clearest indicators of shame is the language you use with yourself. Pay attention to the words that arise in difficult moments. "I'm such a failure. I never do anything right. No one could love me as I am. I always ruin everything." These are not mere observations, they are declarations of identity. They do not say, "I made a mistake." They say, "I am the mistake." This is the voice of shame, speaking in absolute terms that attack your very being. Another place where shame reveals itself is avoidance. Perhaps you avoid public speaking, not because you lack the skill, but because you fear being exposed as inadequate. Maybe you hesitate to share creative work, not due to lack of talent, but because you dread the possibility of rejection. You decline opportunities to express opinions, desires, or boundaries, not because you cannot, but because you have been conditioned to believe that showing your authentic self will result in humiliation. Shame thrives on this avoidance, feeding on every chance not taken, every truth withheld. Shame also manifests in self-sabotage. The chronic procrastinator may not simply be lazy, they may be delaying action because taking a step forward risks failure, and failure would confirm their hidden belief of inadequacy. The perfectionist who endlessly polishes every detail is not only striving for excellence, they are desperately trying to protect themselves from being judged. Addictive behaviors, compulsive habits, and even social withdrawal often carry roots in shame, functioning as shields against the raw pain of not feeling enough. But shame is not only turned inward, it is often projected outward. Individuals consumed by shame may become hypercritical of others. The parent who feels inadequate may place impossible standards on their children. The manager who secretly believes they are unworthy may micromanage their employees with harsh scrutiny. By judging others, they temporarily relieve the pressure of their own internal judge. The mechanism is unconscious, but its message is clear: if I cannot accept myself, then I will not allow others to be accepted either. This is how shame perpetuates itself across relationships, families, and societies. Recognizing these patterns requires courage because it demands brutal honesty. It is not easy to admit that your inner critic is not wisdom but shame. It is painful to realize that the perfectionism you once wore as a badge of honor is actually armor. It is unsettling to see that avoidance, procrastination, or over-criticism may not be random habits but the fingerprints of shame. And yet, in this very recognition lies the beginning of freedom. Because once you can point to shame and say, "That voice is not me," you create distance. And in that space of distance, possibility opens. Awareness transforms shame from an unquestionable truth into something conditional and constructed. When you recognize that the thought, "I am worthless," is not reality but conditioning, you weaken its hold. When you catch yourself avoiding vulnerability and realize, "This is shame speaking, not my authentic self," you reclaim a measure of choice. Awareness does not erase shame immediately, but it strips it of its invisibility. And shame, exposed to light, begins to lose its strength. From here, the question becomes urgent: once we recognize shame, how do we dismantle it? How do we silence the inner judge that has shaped so many decisions and withheld so much joy? The answer is not through force or denial, but through something far more radical and transformative: self-compassion. This is where the true work of liberation begins. Breaking the cycle. If shame is a prison built from silence, then liberation begins the moment we shine light into its darkest corners. To break the cycle of shame is not to erase the past or pretend the wounds never existed. It is to reclaim the truth: shame is not identity, it is conditioning. It was learned, and therefore it can be unlearned. The key to this transformation is self-compassion, an act as radical as it is necessary. Self-compassion is often misunderstood. It is not indulgence, not blind positivity, not repeating empty mantras in the mirror. True compassion is deeper. It is the decision to face your own pain without turning away. It is sitting with your wounds, your failures, your imperfections, and saying, "I see you, and you are still worthy of love." It is treating yourself with the same patience you would offer a friend, the same gentleness you would show a child. It is not escape, it is courage. Kristin Neff, one of the foremost researchers on this subject, describes self-compassion as an antidote to shame because it changes the nervous system itself. Shame keeps the body in a constant state of threat, alert, tense, defensive. Compassion signals safety. When practiced consistently, it calms the storm, allowing growth and healing to emerge. In that safety, authenticity has space to breathe again. The first step is questioning the voice of shame. Ask yourself, who taught me to see myself this way? Where did I learn that my worth depends on perfection or approval? Why have I believed that mistakes erase dignity? These are not rhetorical questions. They are tools of dismantling. Because once you trace the origin of shame, you realize it is not innate, it was placed there. A parent's harsh words. A teacher's cruel remark. A culture obsessed with comparison. These voices shaped shame, but they are not the voice of truth. From here, the practice of compassion means giving yourself permission to be human. To stumble, to feel, to change, to contradict yourself. To replace "I am a mistake" with "I made a mistake, and I can learn." To replace "I am unworthy" with "I am imperfect, and still deserving of love." Each act of gentleness is not weakness but resistance against the system of shame that tried to control you. The next step is bringing shame into the open. Shame thrives in secrecy. It survives only in shadows. When you name it, whether in journaling, in therapy, in conversation, or even in a quiet moment with yourself, you strip it of its greatest weapon, silence. Telling your story does not erase the scar, but it transforms the scar into a reminder of survival, not of failure. Every word spoken aloud, every truth acknowledged, loosens shame's grip. This does not mean shame will vanish forever. It may still whisper when you are vulnerable. It may still rise when you risk something new. But now you know what it is. You can answer back. You can say, "That voice is not me. That fear is not truth." With each response, shame loses power. Its walls weaken. Its judge grows quiet. And gradually, you step into the freedom of living without apology. Breaking the cycle of shame is not about becoming perfect, it is about becoming real. It is about reclaiming the authenticity you once sacrificed for approval. It is about learning to stand in your truth without fear of rejection. And most importantly, it is about discovering that love, real love, including self-love, was never found in hiding, but in the courage to be seen as you are. At this moment, you may still carry old echoes, words from childhood, comparisons that cut deeply, looks that left scars. But now, you also carry tools. Awareness. Language. Compassion. With these, you no longer need to live small. You no longer need to silence yourself. You no longer need to apologize for existing. You are not your shame. You are not your wounds. You are whole, worthy, and capable. And every step you take toward authenticity is a step into freedom. The cycle has been broken. Shame will not define you again. Never again.